You would give this to me?
Just until the storm passes.
She took a rancher's jacket on a cold night. War drums thundered outside his fence. 200 warriors stood in perfect silence along my fence line, their painted faces catching the brittle light of morning. Not a hand twitched, not a throat cleared. They stood like carved statues of war, unblinking, unmoving, yet alive in a way that made my blood run cold. I could feel their eyes piercing through the glass of my cabin window, studying me the way a hawk studies a rabbit. I sat at the rough-hewn table, my hands wrapped around a tin coffee cup I couldn't bring to my lips. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of their gaze. Yesterday I had been nobody, just Jedediah Stone, a half-forgotten gunslinger who had long since tired of killing, a man who came west looking for silence and ended up burying himself in it, a man who had never loved, never dared, never even tried to understand the tribes who moved across these plains like shadows. And now I was the center of something I could not name, something that began with nothing more than a jacket and a woman's smile. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. The storm that bound me to her came sudden, as storms often do out here. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deep, bruised purple, heavy with the kind of silence that presses against your chest. Then the wind rose, carrying with it the smell of iron and wet dust. The first drops fell like bullets, cold and sharp, before the heavens split and poured everything they had onto my small patch of earth. I remember cursing under my breath, tugging my hat low, running to check the corral where my 2 horses stamped nervously against the storm. Doc, the old bay gelding, snorted and shook his head like he'd seen this all before. Mercy, the young palomino, danced sideways, rope taut in my hand, and then I saw her. At first, she looked like a mirage, a figure staggering in the rain, no clearer than a dream until the lightning flashed and gave her shape. Her long black hair clung to her shoulders, drenched until it glistened like obsidian. Her buckskin dress was plastered to her body, dripping until each fringe spilled streams of water. She looked less like a woman and more like a spirit, some ghost pulled from the earth and forced to walk the storm. But she was no ghost. Her steps were heavy, deliberate, the way a body moves when it has carried too much for too long. She stumbled once, caught herself, and pressed on, her eyes darting behind her as if something unseen stalked her from the trees. I didn't think. Instinct took me. "Ma'am, you need shelter," I shouted, the rain stealing half my words. My boots sank into the mud as I ran toward her. She turned at my call. For the space of one lightning strike, I saw her face. Her eyes, dark, wide, fierce, caught me still. They weren't afraid of me. I know that look too well, the look women give men who mean harm. No, her fear was elsewhere, tethered to the shadows behind her, the storm-torn tree line. She looked back once, twice, like the trees themselves carried teeth waiting to close on her. "I cannot stay," she said, her voice barely more than breath. Soft, accented, careful, like each word carried the weight of 2 tongues. "My people will worry." Then, she was trembling, lips turning blue, but her back was straight, her pride fierce even in the storm. And I remembered my father, his voice on nights when snow crushed the roof and hunger bit through bone. "Son," he'd tell me, "a man's worth isn't the land he claims or the gold he pockets. It's whether he lets another soul freeze while he's warm. Never let a stranger die if your hand can stop it." I hadn't thought of him in months, years, maybe. But in that moment, his words lit in me like fire. I tore off my jacket. It wasn't just a jacket. It was the last thing of my father's I still carried. Deerskin, worn and scarred, smelling faintly of smoke and horses. He had weathered winters in it. I had mended its seams, cursed its weight, cherished its warmth. And yet I draped it over her shoulders without hesitation. The change in her was instant. Her eyes widened, lowering to the battered hide as though I'd wrapped her in something precious beyond measure. Her fingers closed on it tightly, holding it as though she feared the storm itself would rip it away. Then she lifted her gaze back to mine, and I swear the storm hushed for that heartbeat. "You would give this to me," she whispered, voice breaking like a twig underfoot. "Just until the storm passes," I said quickly. My cheeks burned with heat, even as the rain soaked me through. "You're freezing." She pulled the jacket close, pressing it to her as if it could shield her from all the world's cruelties. And for that fragile instant, standing in the lashing rain, I felt something stir in me I thought long dead. Then she smiled, not the polite smile of gratitude, not the cautious, fleeting nod strangers trade. This smile pierced. It reached straight into my hollow chest, into the emptiness I had made for myself. It was a smile that said she saw me, truly saw me, in a way no one had for years. "My name is Morning Star," she said, soft yet strong. "Jedediah Stone," I answered, and my name felt foreign on my tongue. "I will remember this kindness, Jedediah Stone." Before I could invite her into my cabin, before I could ask what chased her through the night, she was gone. She vanished into the storm, swallowed whole by rain and darkness. I stood alone in the corral, mud sucking at my boots, rain carving rivers down my face. My jacket, the last piece of my father, had gone with her. But more than the jacket had left me. Something inside me, something I had locked away, had slipped free. I walked back to the cabin, soaked to the bone, shoulders heavy as stone. I sat at the table, staring through the fogged glass of the window, listening to the storm scream across the plains. My coffee cooled untouched. The fire hissed and spat, too small to warm the emptiness swelling inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her eyes, the way she clutched my jacket, the way her voice wrapped around my name like it mattered. I thought I'd buried my heart years ago, out on some blood-soaked trail where I swore I'd never draw a gun again. But in the space of a storm, a stranger had unearthed it. I didn't know then that her name, Morning Star, would burn brighter in my life than any sun. I didn't know that a kindness, as small as the gift of a jacket, would drag me out of silence and into a story of blood, betrayal, and love fierce enough to scorch the plains. All I knew, as the storm died and the dawn crept pale across the land, was this: Morning Star was gone, and Jedediah Stone, the man I thought I had become, would never be the same again. I counted the heartbeats between their breaths. From my cabin window I could see them, a dark river of bodies pouring along my fence line in an iron-straight rank. 200 at first, painted faces catching the thin slate light of morning, braids heavy with rain, horses stamping steam into the cold. Not one man shifted, not one voice rose above the hush of the wind. They watched me as if I were a flame in a dry house. I brought the coffee to my lips and couldn't drink. The cup knocked gently against my teeth. I set it down and listened to the nothing, the kind of silence that makes a man feel judged. 3 hours passed 2, 3. Then the slow crawl past 4 on the clock I kept nailed above the stove, its tick swallowed by my pulse. I tried to be a man about his chores, cracked the door, fed the chickens with the soft scritch of grain against tin, checked the trough where a thin crust of ice had formed, tapped it with a stick until water showed black underneath. But every step I took had eyes on it. I felt each glance like a finger pressed to my back. When I hefted the bucket, a line of faces followed the arc of my arm. When I latched the barn door, 100 chests seemed to breathe in at once, then hold. They weren't threatening, no arrows notched, no lances lowered. But numbers carry a language even a fool can read. 200 men could overrun my fence, my barn, my every small possession in under 10 minutes if they chose. I've seen what numbers do. I've been numbers. The first groups had formed at dawn, stretching along my north and east fences until they looked like a living wall. By mid-morning, I saw more riders ghosting out of the hills in 2s and 3s, then in 5s, then in a string that didn't seem to end. Noon found my shadow short, and the grass glittering with frost, and what had been hundreds had swelled, God help me, to near 1,000. They arranged themselves with a skill that spoke of drill and years. No gaps, no sloppiness, no one too eager, no one too slow. I realized then I wasn't looking at chance. This was design, purpose. A hand had called them, and they had come. I thought of the night before, of the storm like a mouth swallowing the world, and the woman who stepped out of it, as if spat back by the dark. Morning Star. The way her fingers had held my father's jacket, as if it were warmth and oath in one. The way my name had sounded in her mouth, Jedediah Stone, as if names themselves carried medicine. It should have been nothing, a kindness to a stranger, a shelter against the rain. But the West has a way of turning small kindnesses into long debts, and debts into war. I don't know when I made the mistake of thinking I could hide in these plains. Probably the first morning I woke to nothing but wind and the far cough of a cow, and thought silence itself was a kind of salvation. Now silence felt like the lid of a coffin. The line broke, not with shouts or the rattle of hooves, just a single rider moving with slow, deliberate grace. Tall in the saddle, the man wore an elaborate headdress that caught the winter sun and scattered it into shards. He dismounted before the front gate and walked 10 paces toward my porch like each step belonged to the earth. He didn't paint his face for war. He had the bearing of a man who never needed paint to be believed. I opened the door and stepped out. My knees trembled. I locked them. "Jedediah Stone," he said in clean, unaccented English that felt older than the boards beneath my feet. "Yes," I managed. "I am Black Eagle, chief of the Lakota band that travels these lands." His eyes flicked once to the fences, to the horses, to the hills, then back to me. "We have come about the woman." A hush moved across the rank of warriors. Not a sound so much as a tightening, like bowstrings pulled as one. "The woman," I repeated, though the name beat in my skull like a drum. "Morning Star? The woman you sheltered in the storm," he said. "The woman who now wears your jacket." The words struck my chest with a coldness I did not expect. Jacket. As if the deerskin had become a flag. "She was cold," I said. And even to my ears the defense was thin. I was just being neighborly. Black Eagle studied me with a hunter's stillness. "Young gunslinger," he said, and there was no mockery in the title, only a weight. "Do you know who she is?" "She told me her name," I said. "Morning Star. That is all I know." "That is not all you need to know." He turned his head slightly, and the headdress feathers whispered. "Each of these men would die for her without question. They have ridden 2 days and 1 night, left wives, mothers, children, and graves behind, because word reached us that she had been seen with a white man and wearing his jacket." I felt the blood drain from my face. 2 days, 1 night, across a winter plain that could kill a careless calf in an hour. "I don't understand," I said. "It was just a jacket." "A jacket," he repeated, and his voice gentled in a way that made it worse. "Among our people, a gift offered in need can be more than cloth or leather. It can be a sign of trust, of shelter, of honor. You placed a thing of your father across my daughter's shoulders." The plank beneath my boot creaked. "Your daughter." He nodded once. "Morning Star is my child." I wanted to say something about respect, about breath in a storm and doing what any man ought. The words wouldn't come. My mouth was full of the taste you get when a rifle misfires, bitter, metal, useless. He spoke again, and the world narrowed to his voice. "She left our camp 2 days ago to gather herbs for her grandmother's cough. She did not return before the storm. Her horse was found at sunrise, spooked and lathered. The last person to see her alive was you." Alive. It didn't land as a threat. It landed as a fact that weighed more than my cabin's roof. For a long moment, there was only wind combing the grass and the far, patient shift of horses. I could feel every gaze along the fence line turn to the same point, me. I was the last light on a dark road, and they were coming down it. Something in me wanted to reach up for the rifle above the door, not to point it at anyone God knew that would be suicide, but to hold something that wasn't words. I kept my hands at my sides. I'd promised myself years ago there were fights I would not enter again. But sometimes a man doesn't go to the fight. The fight finds him, comes to his door like winter, takes his name as collateral. "I offered her my cabin," I said. "She wouldn't take it. She said her people would worry. She walked back into the storm with my jacket." I swallowed. I thought she'd be all right. She carried herself like someone who had crossed worse storms than mine. Black Eagle's eyes softened, then cooled. "Morning Star is the finest rider in our camp. Her horse does not spook at thunder or gunshot. If she is on foot in a storm, it is because someone put her there." A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the air. I remembered the way she'd kept looking over her shoulder toward the tree line, the fear that wasn't fear of me, a shadow in the timber with teeth. What happens now? I asked, though the part of me that prefers ignorance begged me to shut my mouth. That depends, he said, on what we find between your ranch and our camp, on why she accepted your jacket, on who wished her harm enough to take her from her horse, and most of all, his voice fell to a low, steady thread, on whether you will help us bring her home. There it was, the choice that wasn't a choice, laid like a blade across the porch boards. I glanced past him at the human wall wrapped around my life. I thought of the jacket stitched by my father's hands and warmed by my body, now clutched to a woman's chest somewhere out in 12 miles of wilderness, where cougars left their prints in the sand and men left their sins in shallow graves. I thought of the years I'd spent trying not to be needed by anyone or anything. The silence I had worshipped wasn't silence at all, it was a kind of death. "I'll help," I heard myself say, and the truth was that the decision had already been made the moment she smiled in the rain. "Tell me what you need from me." Black Eagle inclined his head. "I need your eyes," he said. "An outsider sees where a father does not. I will read the ground. You will read the men." He took one step back, then paused, studying me again with that measuring calm. "Know this, not all harm comes from enemies. There are those among my own who hunger for power they have not earned. Word of my daughter wearing a white man's jacket rode faster than any horse. My stomach tightened. Betrayal within the line. I had seen that too in towns with good churches and bad cellars, in companies where a man would trade a brother for a day's pay. You don't survive the trail I have without learning that some bullets come painted as blessings. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. I looked at the fence, the hills, the faint scar of trail where her tracks would be, long since washed, then back at the chief. "When do we ride?" "Now," he said. "Every hour we stand here is a mile given to whoever took her." He turned and raised one hand, and a column of riders detached from the line with quiet efficiency, 50 men, maybe 60, their horses fresh, their eyes never leaving me. The larger force did not move. They were a ring and a promise both. Nothing in, nothing out. Not without the chief's word. I saddled Doc with fingers that felt too big for the buckles. My breakfast lay untouched on the table, congealed eggs and cooling beans. I left them for the coyotes. As I swung into the saddle, the leather creaked a humble sound I had heard 1,000 times. Today, it sounded like a door closing behind me. We moved at a steady trot down the line of my fence, then turned north toward the low swell of country that ran like a bruised shoulder between my land and theirs. The snow in the draws hadn't melted. It squeaked under hoof. The wind carried the thin, bright smell of sage crushed wet. I measured the space between riders, the cut of their eyes, the hands that hovered too close to knives. Black Eagle rode at my side, posture easy, gaze restless as a wolf's. "You saw her last where?" he asked. "South Corral," I said. "She left toward the cottonwoods, then vanished into the rain." "We start there," he said. "We end where the truth takes us." I asked the question that sat like a stone on my tongue. "And if the truth is that she's—" "Truth is truth," he said quietly. "But I have learned to bargain with dawn. We will find her before the sun forgets us." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe anything. We reached the place where night and rain had taken her from me. The trampled mud was long set, scabbed by cold. Black Eagle dismounted without a word and knelt as though in prayer, touching the ground with the back of his hand, then with the tips of his fingers. He moved no more than inches at a time, reading what the land remembered, the story written in a scuff, in a tuft of grass bent one way and not the other, in the faint crescent of a heel print half filled by silt. "She went this way," he said at last, rising and pointing toward a rocky outcropping that shouldered up out of the plain 1/2 mile to the north. "And not alone." "How do you know?" I asked, ashamed of how small I sounded. "Her steps deep on the left, lighter on the right. Injury." He pointed to a barely there depression that my eye wanted to call nothing. Boots behind her, larger. A man who was not afraid of being seen in the storm. A pressure tightened in my chest until it hurt to breathe. The vision came unbidden. Morning Star limping, her breaths ragged, the jacket dark with rain, a figure behind her with patience and a long stride. We rode. Men spread in a line abreast, then tightened again at a signal I didn't hear. Twice I caught riders trading glances when the chief wasn't looking, quick, sharp, like cards palmed at a table. I put those faces in a pocket in my mind and kept riding. By the time the sun slid a hand's breadth past noon, we reached the stony rise where the plain broke into a confusion of gullies and low shelves. The land swallowed tracks like a liar swallows vows. Wind scored everything clean. Still, the chief found what he needed. A smear of blood thin as a thread on a rock, the broken tip of a grass stem pointing east, a place where the grit was scuffed by a heel that had slid. Not enough to kill, he said, voice like iron. Enough to weaken. The trail split 3 ghost paths, pulling in 3 directions. One toward the river, its banks a slick promise of erasure. One angling for the low brown teeth of the mountains. One bending back, cruel as a lie, toward my ranch. Chief, a young rider said, urging his horse forward, bracelets bright on his wrist. We should split our force. Take all 3. Speed is life. I looked at his face. It was too eager. Not with fear, with calculation. I turned slightly in the saddle and scanned the line. More than one man's jaw worked. More than one hand touched the braid at his shoulder, without meaning to. Black Eagle's gaze moved from the ground to the men and back again, like a pendulum that could cut. He took his time. Then he shook his head. No, he said, soft and final. We stay together. Whoever took my daughter wants us scattered, chasing shadows while they lead her where they will. A ripple passed through the riders, not relief. Something else. I saw plans crumple behind eyes, timelines falter. The chief touched his heel to his horse and gestured toward the river. This way bears more weight. The truth is heavy. It leaves a deeper mark. We turned east, and with the first glimpse of the river's dark braid in the distance, a feeling moved through me I could not name, something like hope and dread, married in the same breath. Somewhere between my fence and that black water, a woman wrapped in my father's jacket had vanished, and I had ridden too far to ever be the man I was before. The accusation hung between us like a drawn blade. I could feel it in the silence after Black Eagle's words, could taste it in the cold air, sharp as iron. The last person to see my daughter alive was you. 1,000 eyes pinned me in place, every stare heavy with judgment, suspicion, the promise of retribution. I gripped the saddle horn tighter, trying to steady my breath. But the truth was, I had never felt so small, so utterly exposed. Black Eagle's voice dropped lower, gravel carried on the wind. She was not simply lost, she was being followed. Someone who meant her harm drove her from her horse. Morning Star would not leave her mount willingly, not unless death itself pressed her forward. The words sank deep. I remembered her face in the storm, the way she had kept turning, eyes darting toward the tree line. That was no fear of thunder, that was fear of pursuit. A chill crawled down my spine that the thickest fire could not have chased away. And now, the chief continued, his gaze scanning his riders, she has vanished somewhere between this man's ranch and our camp. 12 miles of wilderness, and danger waiting in every shadow. His eyes came back to me, hard and unyielding. You will ride with us, Jedediah Stone. You will help us find her, and you will watch my men while I track the ground, for there are faces that speak lies even as their lips are still. I swallowed hard, my hand brushing against the revolver I swore I would never draw again. His request was not mercy, it was sentence. Ride with them, or die beneath their suspicion. I'll come, I said, my voice low but steady. If she vanished between us, then my eyes owe you truth. We left my ranch behind in a slow, deliberate column. The larger force of warriors stayed to encircle my land like a living wall, while 50 rode with us, Black Eagle at the front, me at his side. The sound of so many hooves drummed through the earth, steady, relentless. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. I tried not to meet their eyes. Some glanced at me with cold indifference, others with naked hostility. A few looked away too quickly, as if hiding something. Black Eagle was right. Danger didn't just sit in the tree line, it rode beside us. We reached the spot where I had last seen Morning Star. The mud was hardened by cold, rain-slick, yet the chief dismounted and knelt with the patience of a priest reading scripture. His fingers brushed the ground, tracing marks invisible to me. "She went this way," he murmured, pointing toward a rocky outcrop. But she was not alone. I leaned forward. "How can you tell?" "Her steps are uneven. Deeper on the left side she favored her leg, injured." He touched a shallow depression a few paces behind. "Boots, larger than her feet. A man's." He followed close. My gut twisted. The image of her limping, clutching my jacket around her shoulders while someone stalked behind her, struck me like a blow. We rode harder now, following the faint trail. The warriors spread out, scanning the ground, their eyes sharper than any hunter's. Yet whenever my gaze passed over them, conversations died. Men who had been whispering fell silent. I caught glances traded too quickly, hands brushing blades at their sides. I began to notice what the chief wanted me to see. Nerves, not from grief or concern, but from guilt. A few men looked as if every step took them closer to secrets they wished buried. Hours dragged like years. Then Black Eagle raised his fist and the column halted. He crouched by a patch of stone, his jaw tightening. "Blood," he said simply. I slid down from my saddle, my boots crunching on gravel. At first I saw nothing. Then I caught a thin smear on the gray rock, dark brown against the pale surface. My stomach clenched. "How much?" I asked, my throat dry. "Not enough to kill," he said, his voice grim, "but enough to weaken her." Then I closed my eyes, trying not to picture Morningstar stumbling, her strength pouring out with each step. When I opened them again, I realized the trail had split. 3 directions lay before us, one winding toward the river, its banks swollen with storm water, one bending north toward the jagged teeth of the mountains, and one cruelly circling back toward the land near my ranch. A young warrior rode forward, his chest bare save for painted spirals across his skin. His eyes glittered with an eagerness I distrusted. "Chief," he called, "we should split our force. Take all 3 trails. If she is injured, time is our enemy." The suggestion hung in the cold air, logical on the surface, but the eagerness in his voice made my stomach churn. My eyes swept the men around us. More than one looked nervous. But it wasn't worry for Morningstar, it was the worry of plans unraveling. I leaned toward Black Eagle and muttered, "You see it, don't you? Some of them, they already know what waits down those trails." His face was carved from stone, but I caught the smallest flicker in his eyes. He had seen it too. "No," he said aloud, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We do not scatter. We stay as one. Whoever took her wants us divided, chasing shadows." A ripple moved through the column. Some shoulders sagged with relief, others stiffened with frustration. I saw jaws tighten, hands flex nervously. The betrayal was here, riding among us, waiting for the chance to strike. We turned toward the river trail, following the weight in the tracks. The land grew narrower, the banks rising on either side. I could feel the tension tightening like a noose. I kept my hand near my revolver, though I prayed not to use it. My heart pounded with a sick rhythm, every hoofbeat hammering the truth deeper into me. The danger wasn't only ahead, it was beside me. Morningstar was out there somewhere, hurt, hunted, wrapped in my jacket like a flag of war. And if we didn't find her soon, I feared she'd vanish forever, not into the storm this time, but into the silence of the grave. The river ran high from the storm, swollen and brown, tearing branches from the banks and dragging them like corpses downstream. Our horses struggled for footing in the mud, hooves sliding, snorting clouds of white breath into the cold. I kept glancing at the ground, though I had no skill in reading it, trusting only what Black Eagle pointed out. His eyes, sharper than any rifle sight, caught every faint sign, a scuffed stone, a reed bent against the grain of the wind. "She crossed here," he said at last, kneeling to touch the churned bank. "But not by her will." I slid from my saddle and crouched beside him. At first all I saw was chaos, mud ripped by rain, tracks lost in the mess. But he showed me the footprints were too wide apart, forced. A drag mark told the rest. Someone had driven her faster than her body could endure. My stomach turned to stone. "She was pushed," I whispered. The chief nodded grimly. Then he reached out and pulled something from a low branch hanging over the water. My heart nearly stopped. It was my jacket. Dark, sodden, caught deliberately on the branch as though placed there for us to find. The deerskin sagged with water. Its weight doubled, but I recognized every stitch. My father's coat. My gift. Morning Star's shield. She left it as a sign, Black Eagle said softly, almost like a prayer. My daughter is clever. She knew we would come this way. I took the jacket in my hands, felt its soaked leather cling to my skin. For a moment it was as though I was holding her, but then I saw something else tucked inside the pocket, a piece of bark, folded, black with markings. Black Eagle's expression darkened as he read. His weathered face seemed to pale beneath its paint. "What does it say?" I asked, my voice cracking. He looked up, his eyes hard as flint. "It says, 'The daughter pays for the father's crimes. Sunset tomorrow or she dies.'" The words hung over us like a death sentence. I felt the world tilt. This wasn't random. It wasn't some greedy suitor chasing a dream of power. This was vengeance aimed squarely at the chief, with Morning Star as the knife. I barely had time to absorb it before I noticed the shift among the warriors. A murmur moved through them, too quick, too sharp, and then the young one who had urged us to split trails earlier, Kitchi, rode forward again, his jaw tight. "Chief," he said too quickly, "we cannot waste time. We must spread out, find her before the sun falls." I looked at his face and saw it plain. Not concern, but calculation. The kind of expression a gambler wears when his hand begins to unravel. Black Eagle must have seen it too. His jaw clenched, but before he could speak, the canyon swallowed us. The walls rose higher, narrowing the path. The air grew still. My horse shifted uneasily beneath me, ears flicking. I felt it before I heard it, the wrongness, the way silence gathers just before thunder. Then the first arrow screamed. It clattered against stone, a breath from my head. The canyon erupted. War cries split the air, echoing off the rock. Arrows rained down from above. Shadows moved along the ridge, figures darting, firing, shouting. "Ambush!" I cried, ducking low. My revolver was in my hand before I thought, the old reflexes tearing out of me like a demon unchained. The warriors scattered for cover, returning fire with bows and rifles. Horses reared, screaming. Dust and stone filled the air. Amid the chaos I saw it, Kitchi, not taking cover, not fighting, but raising his hand, signaling toward the ridge. His fingers moved in deliberate shapes, signals no honest man would use under fire. "Black Eagle," I roared above the din. "He's with them." The chief's head snapped toward where I pointed. His eyes blazed with fury. In one fluid motion he lifted his bow, drew, and loosed. The arrow struck Kitchi through the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. His cry was lost in the storm of battle. The fight turned, confusion cutting both ways. Betrayal revealed itself in blood. Some of the warriors faltered, their certainty shattered by the chief's arrow. Others pressed harder, desperate to finish what treachery had begun. And then I saw her, high up on the canyon wall, a flash of buckskin, hair streaming in the wind. Morning Star, bound, gagged, but alive. Her eyes found mine even from that distance, wide with fear and desperate hope. "She's up there," I shouted, pointing. "North wall, 50 yards. Too exposed," Black Eagle growled, loosing another arrow. "They will kill her before we can reach." But my legs were already moving. I hit the ground running, mud sucking at my boots. My body slammed against the cliffside, fingers clawing for purchase on jagged stone. I climbed, each breath a knife in my chest. Arrows hissed around me, chips of rock spraying my face. I climbed anyway. The world narrowed to the scrape of stone under my nails, the burn in my arms, the pounding in my ears. All I could see was her Morning Star, waiting, trapped, so close to the edge of being lost forever. At last I reached the ledge. I hauled myself over, my palms raw, lungs on fire. She was there, hands tied, eyes blazing. Relief surged through me so fierce it nearly toppled me. "It's going to be all right," I whispered, pulling my knife free. The ropes gave way, frayed fibers snapping under the blade. I tore the gag from her mouth. Her first breath was ragged, desperate. Then she spoke, voice low and fierce. "Jedediah, it was Kitchi. He betrayed my father. He told them where to find me." "I know," I said. Your father saw it too. We rose together. But the ledge was a trap. Sheer drops on three sides, no way down except the treacherous path I had climbed. Arrows whistled past, one splintering inches from her shoulder. We're pinned, I muttered. She shook her head, eyes flashing. Number, there's another way. Follow me, and stay low. Then, she moved quick despite her ordeal, guiding me toward a narrow crack in the rock. I followed, heart hammering, until the ledge twisted down into a hidden path. It was steep, dangerous, but it spilled us out behind a cluster of boulders overlooking the canyon floor. From there we could see him, the enemy leader, standing behind cover, shouting orders, confident in his advantage. "Can you shoot?" she asked, her gaze sharp. "Not well," I admitted, breathless. "Then give me your rifle." "Oh." I hesitated only a moment before handing it over. She took it with hands that did not tremble, settled into position, and drew a bead with the calm of one born to it. The shot cracked like thunder. The leader staggered. A scream ripped from his throat as the bullet drove through his thigh. Chaos rippled through his men. Black Eagle's warriors seized the moment, rallying with renewed fury. They surged forward, overwhelming the ambushers. Cries filled the canyon, some in victory, others in despair. By the time I pulled Morningstar fully behind cover, the tide had turned. The enemy broke, scattering, leaving their wounded leader crawling in the dust. Morningstar lowered the rifle, her breath steady despite the storm in her eyes. She looked at me then, not as a stranger, not as a fool gunslinger, but as if she had known me far longer than a storm's passing. And in that moment, though blood still soaked the stones and betrayal still lingered among the men, I felt something shift. The storm that had begun with kindness had become something far greater. The battle ended the way a storm breaks, no warning, no tidy border between fury and calm, just a sudden lightness in the air where death had been a moment before. One volley, then another, and the echoes thinned against the canyon walls until only the drip of water and the skitter of loose stones remained. Men who had come to kill lay with their faces in the dust, groaning, cursing, or silent. The survivors threw down their weapons with hands that shook. The traitor bled into the grit, clutching his shoulder, eyes turned away from the sky as if heaven itself would not look on him. I stood with my back to the rock, Morningstar pressed against me, the rise and fall of her breath telling me more than the sight of her eyes that she was still here. I could feel the tremor in her body slowly steady, like a horse easing when the lightning passes to the far hills. I wanted to say 1,000 things and could say none. I had climbed with nothing but stubbornness and a knife, and somehow it had been enough. Black Eagle found us there. Dust streaked his hair, and blood marked his forearm in a thin line. He took in the ledge, the path, the bound men below, the wounded leader dragging himself backward like a broken serpent. Then he looked at Morningstar, at me, and something like pride loosened the iron in his face. "You climbed a canyon wall for my child," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to the men who listened for it. "That is courage I did not know you possessed, Jedediah Stone." I had no answer. My tongue was useless. All the blood in my body seemed to pool at my ribs. Morningstar's fingers found my wrist and held. The touch was simple and everything. They brought us down by the hidden path she had known since childhood, her secret between stone and wind. On the canyon floor, the truth lay in pieces. The wounded leader stifling a scream as a warrior bound his leg tight, the traitors disarmed, wrists tied with rawhide, eyes like animals that have learned the trap's language too late. The young man who had urged us to split Kitchie glared at me as if my breath had betrayed him, not his own hand. He spat into the dust and kept his gaze low when Black Eagle turned toward him. "There are ways to mend a broken circle," the chief said to no one and everyone. "But a man who cuts his own people from behind does not hold the knife again." Justice was not mine to mete out, not here. I felt the weight of that and was grateful for it. I had seen too much vengeance under banners called righteous. I could not bear adding more. We moved slow through the narrowing canyon and out into the broader country where the river braided itself, bright and black, through winter grass. Men rode on either side of us. The prisoners were kept in the column's mouth where any bolt would catch a dozen eyes. Morningstar sat straight in the saddle despite the bruises on her wrists, the rawness at the corners of her mouth. She did not complain. She did not lean. But once, over the drumming of hooves, she leaned closer to speak. "You came," she said simply. "I would have come if there had been no men, no chief, no horses left on this earth," I answered, surprised by the truth of it as it left me. "I would have crawled until my fingers bled." Her smile then was small and terrible in its gentleness. "I know," she said. The sun followed us toward my fence line, lowering slow like a tired eyelid. Long before we reached it, I heard them. The ring of warriors we had left behind, the ones who had waited through the long noon. Their voices rose not in war cries now, but in something between greeting and relief, a sound with a shape like laughter, if laughter could be shaped by discipline. When the column broke through, the wall of bodies opened, and a path carved itself through men who had sworn to stand stone still until the chief returned with either his daughter or the reason for his rage. We passed along that living corridor, Morning Star beside me, Black Eagle ahead, and I felt their eyes on me again, but differently. Not as if I were a suspect under the judge's hat, but as if I had been weighed and not found wanting. A few of the older men touched closed fists to their chests. One boy, the kind of young I had been before, I learned how bullets find you, grinned so wide his paint cracked, then remembered himself and looked away, ashamed of joy in a day that still carried blood. I reined in at my porch. The coffee on the table had gone cold and developed a skin. The plate of eggs I'd left looked like something abandoned at a camp years ago. My life had been interrupted in mid-bite, and it would not resume where it stopped. Black Eagle turned in the saddle. "We will take our traitors home," he said. "We will clean the wound together. But there is one more thing before we go." He looked at Morning Star. She drew the deerskin from her shoulders, the jacket that had been my father's, then mine, then hers in the hour when rain wrote its blunt script across the world. She held it out to me, arms straight, not lowering her eyes. "You should have this back," she said. Her voice had steadied. "It belongs to your line. It is a strange, holy pain, richer than joy, to be offered back the very thing you gave without thinking you would see it again." I remembered my father's smell in winter, leather and smoke, the way the stitches pulled when his shoulders broadened with laughter no one thought he had. I thought of how I had become a man who kept to himself and called it peace, how I had carried this jacket like a proof that I came from kindness even when I did not practice it. "Keep it," I said. "Something tells me you've earned it more than I ever did." The sound the warriors made, not a laugh, not a shout, was a soft, collective exhale. Morning Star smiled, not with triumph, not with victory, but with that deep warmth I had first seen in the deluge. She folded the coat back over her shoulders as if returning a bird to its nest. Black Eagle slid from his horse, put a hand to my arm. "You will always be welcome in our camp, Jedediah Stone," he said, the words formal, shaped by centuries of mouths. "Any man who climbs into arrows to bring my daughter down again has a place among our fire, a place among their fire." The phrase cut something loose inside me I had not known was still tied. The belief that my life would be an end, stopped with a single name on a single homestead, a man, sized silence in a sea of grass. I looked past my barn to where the plains ran unbroken to a blue seam of hills, and I felt the ache of a door opening. We ate that night with what remained of my stores and what their hunters had carried. My table, scarred by knives and heat, had never known so many hands. Laughter returned in low, careful threads. Grief, too, gathered with it, because the body always remembers both at once. I sat by the threshold, half in and half out, the way a man sits when he knows he is already leaving what he loves. When the fire burned down and the stars came close enough to hear, Morning Star stepped outside and found me on the step. The frost had turned the world into a thing that remembered light. "I told you I would remember your kindness," she said, not smiling now. "I keep things I say." "Then remember this too," I replied, and I surprised myself again. It wasn't kindness. It was the only part of me that was still alive, and I didn't know it until you stood in front of me and shivered. She considered that and nodded, solemn as prayer. Sometimes we need a storm to walk us to ourselves. We were quiet. In the hush I could hear the horses turning in their sleep, the faint click of leather, the soft question a mare asks her foal. I could smell the iron in the night air, the ghost of rain lingering like a held-back sob. "If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and quiet strength, and may a small thread of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to tell me in the comments when it does. Morning touched the world with the back of its hand. Shadows turned blue, then thinned. Men mounted. The prisoners were lashed to their saddles with obedience, not cruelty. Black Eagle lifted his chin at me, asking the question he did not voice. I looked at my fence line, the place I had first counted heartbeats between other men's breaths. I looked at the cabin that had protected me and dulled me in equal measure. I looked at Morning Star, whose name had turned out to be a map. I'll ride, I said, for as long as the trail needs me. I did not lock the door. A man locks what he fears to lose. You cannot lock the wind. I swung into the saddle, felt Doc shift under me, old bones remembering an old music. We turned not back toward the safety of boards and iron nails, but toward the open. The line of riders flowed forward, and I moved with them, my life folding into a new shape without tearing. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if, deep down, you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging the next good thing, then right now leave a comment, Amen. Who knows? At the very moment you write it, a blessing may already be on the way. We did not speak much as the distance opened under our horses. Words are heavy on mornings like that, but Black Eagle fell back to ride beside me, and after a time he said, "A man is not the sum of what he has killed or kept. He is the road he chooses after the storm." He let the reins drape and added, almost to himself, "My daughter will need friends who are not afraid of knives hidden in smiles." "I know something about those," I said. "I have been both." He looked at me then with an understanding that made me look away. The land ahead unrolled in its old, inexhaustible way, a brown-green sea rumor with sudden gullies and islands of rock, cottonwoods marking the secret language of water, sky so large it made a man both small and infinite. Somewhere, a hawk wrote its long cursive line. Somewhere else, a coyote offered its counsel to the morning. I breathed, and for the first time in years the breath went all the way down. We smelled the ruin before we saw it. The sour, metallic breath of wet ash riding the wind, the sharp, greasy sting that comes when a home dies by fire. Doc faltered under me as we crested the low rise, and Morning Star drew alongside, her profile cut from the pale winter light. "Jed," she said, not as a question. "There are moments a name is a prayer, and a warning both." My ranch lay below like a blackened ribcage. The cabin, a box I had hammered together with stubborn hands and quiet hope, had fallen in on itself. The roof slumped toward the hearth as if seeking mercy. The corral posts were torches gone to charcoal, leaning and cracked, each beam a memory with teeth. Boards I'd planed until my palms blistered were now a script the fire had written, and the rain was busy erasing. The chicken coop had collapsed into a shrug of wire and soot. The well rope dangled, singed, above a circle of stones that glittered with tiny flakes of glass. We rode down without speaking. There is an etiquette to grief. Talk too soon, and you bruise the silence beyond repair. The yard, once rutted with ordinary errands, had become a shallow lagoon where ash floated like dead moths. My boots sank, hissed, rose wearing a gray skin. I touched the lintel that had survived long enough to fail. It crumbled under my fingers, leaving a smear of black on my palm. I wiped it on my coat and made the stain worse. Morning Star moved with care through what had been my life. She crouched near the hearth, brushed aside a slick of cinders, and found the iron I'd used to hang the kettle twisted, stubbornly metal, amid the ruin. She did not tell me she was sorry. Pity is a kind of rain that drowns more than it nourishes. Instead, she stood with me and watched the smoke rise in thin, accusing threads into a sky that refused to answer. "This is not wind's anger," she said at last. "This was set. I know." The words sounded older than I was. I walked the perimeter the way a man walks, a fresh grave slow, listening for the lie he can live with. Here and there the fire had burned too purely, too hot, as if fed and coaxed. In 3 places, Blackened puddles had the telltale rainbow slick of lantern oil. A trail of lighter ash ran from the back door to the south wall, like a finger pointing at its own crime. They hadn't taken much. A scorched hinge lay near where the trunk had been. The trunk itself was a gutted belly. Tools were scattered, some stamped into the mud, others left where they fell, as if contempt had replaced greed halfway through the work. This wasn't theft. It was grammar. A message written with fire to be read in daylight. I found it near the smoking ruin of the gate, carved into a charred plank as if the carver had wanted the wood to remember this last purpose. A feather, not delicate, not a copy of life, but a sigil, a lone hawk feather, the quill heavy, the barbs flared like rays from a winter sun. The cut was clean, confident. The hand that made it did not hesitate. Morning Star came to stand beside me. She looked from the carving to my face. "Do you know it?" I felt the old cold rise up from the part of me that never thaws. "Yes," I said, and the ash tasted like iron. "It isn't Lakota. It isn't any people's sign. It's a man's." A hawk hung above us, far off, riding a pale thermic lift the fire had summoned. It made a slow circle, unhurried, patient. I remembered the first time I'd seen that feather cut into a saloon table in Abilene, a brand where brands have no business, an autograph that bled. The chair had been empty, the whittled curl of wood still warm. "A hawk takes what it can see," the bartender had muttered, hand shaking as he poured. Later that night, the floor took a man who didn't rise again. The feather was there, carved where his hand fell. I knelt and touched the groove. The notch at the base was slightly off-center, the left barb shorter than the right. It was how he signed himself, as if even his mark refused to be symmetrical, civilized. Elias Thorne. My mouth formed his name without sound. The ghost. The only man I have ever met who could walk into a room full of guns and make them feel like instruments he might pick up or lay down at whim. His draw didn't blur, it clarified. His eyes could pass for gray until a storm moved behind them. Then they were colorless, like water that has forgotten sky. I had once believed him dead, believed it hard enough that my hands stopped shaking after a year, and my nights made peace with a flicker of sleep. Morning Star's hand found my sleeve. "Who?" "Elias Thorne," I said, and the hawk above us tilted its wing as if to listen. Men called him Ghost because when you looked for where he'd been standing, you found air and a story. When you looked where he had shot from, you found a bullet you could not argue with. He left that feather the way winter leaves ice. Her fingers tightened. "He is from your past. He is the part of my past that didn't die when it should have." I stood, the plank in my hand suddenly heavier than wood. I buried him in my mind. The ground spit him back. She walked the yard again, not searching for proof, she had enough of that, but for shape, for the way a mind turns when it writes with flame. Why now? Because I came above ground. I looked at the black mouth that had been my doorway. Because kindness has a noise, and killers learn to hear it. Left. We found a second sign where the ash thinned near the back fence. The print of a heel turned sharply into the earth, as if the man had stopped to admire his work. The tread was shallow. He was light on his feet. He always was. I walked to the well, hauled the bucket up, and poured. Steam rose from the hot stones around the hearth. The hiss was a sound you don't forget, not even in heaven. Morning Star wet a rag and wiped the soot from the iron kettle's lip until her hands were as filthy as mine. There is comfort in small obediences to a life that no longer exists. She lifted her gaze to me. "We will not live here now," she said softly. It was not an eviction. It was a benediction. But the ground remembers your steps. We will not let the ground think you fled it. "I'm not fleeing," I said, and the cold inside me became something else, a heat with edges. I walked to the cottonwoods, where I had once tied Mercy, to learn the patience that makes a horse worth a man's life. A length of wire hung there, twisted into a lazy loop. In its crook, paper. The wind had not stolen it. It had not been meant to fly. Morning Star reached it before I did, and eased it free as if it could startle and bite. She passed it to me. The ash on my fingers left bruises on the white. The message was not long. The handwriting was angular, correct. The strokes like a military drill. "Jedediah," it read. "You owe me a day. I'll take it at Split Tree Pass. 3 sunsets from this one. Don't be late, Ghost. My jaw clenched until bone spoke to bone. He's not just alive, I said, voice flat. He thinks time is something he can summon with a finger. Morningstar studied the letters. Split Tree, she said, as if tasting the name could tell her where it had hurt me. You know that place. I know it like an old bruise. 2 bent junipers, fused at the root by lightning, split at shoulder height by wind, 1 tree pretending to be 2, 2 pretending to be 1. The pass where he and I had last stood with the same sky on our shoulders and our lives on a thin wire between us. He had walked away that day with blood in his sleeve, and a laughter that asked if I had learned the lesson when the teacher hadn't died. Morningstar put the paper back in my hand. Then he wants more than to burn a house. He wants to burn the part of me that learned to sleep, I said. We walked the yard once more, not as mourners now, but as witnesses signing our names in the book of what had been done to us. I took a nail from the blackened gate and wrapped the carved plank with the hawk feather into the one post that still held. Let it look back at the hills. Let it see the road. Let it imagine, if wood can, the shape of a man returning with a debt called due. Elias Thorne, Morningstar, said in the quiet, as if teaching the air to say his name so the night would not have to. Then we will meet him where he calls. I nodded. There are battles you choose and battles that choose you. Some names you can refuse, and some names answer themselves with your breath. I turned from the ruin of my home and felt the ash cling to my boots. It would travel with me, a gray map stamped on leather, a trail back to a small burnt square of earth where I had once believed a man might grow roots that no wind could find. The hawk above us dwindled until even morning had to guess at its shape. I put my hand to Doc's neck and felt the old horse's warmth, the beat that continues because bodies choose it. Morningstar swung into the saddle with a wince that she hid and did not deny. We rode out of the smoke and into the wind, carrying with us a feather carved into wood, a letter written in iron strokes, and the knowledge that a ghost had stepped back into daylight with my name between his teeth. We made camp at the edge of a low arroyo, where the wind had combed the grass into a single direction, as if the earth itself had decided which way we should face. Twilight pooled in the hollows, purple and blue, and the first bold star pricked the east like a truth that goes on whether or not a man accepts it. We did not build a big fire. Ghosts prefer shadows. There is no reason to make them comfortable. Morningstar gathered dry sage and willow, coaxed a flame quiet as a whisper. She moved with the economy of someone who knows how to make small things do. I hobbled the horses and checked my revolver, a ritual I had cursed and loved in equal measure. You said he is a ghost, she said when I returned, not looking up, her hands busy with the kettle. Tell me the man before the name. Elias Thorne, I began, tasting the vowels the way a man tastes medicine he would not choose. No one agrees on where he learned to shoot. Some say he apprenticed himself to a preacher whose sermons were bullets. Others say he watched the world long enough to understand the math of distance and fear. He is right-handed, but his left is as neat as a clock. He believes a duel is a kind of proof of skill, yes, but also of story. He writes his legend one grave at a time and calls it history. She poured water, and the metal sang a thin, lonely note. And you? She asked. What history did you two write together? Mine began the day I did not die, I said. You don't forget the man who chooses that for you. Then I told her the Abilene table with the feather carved into it. The night the drummer in a yellow vest slumped forward mid-song because Breath had decided he had used his share. The street at high noon where heat made a mirage from the planks and 2 shadows said yes to something that made them both smaller. We drew, I said. Not to kill, not that first time, to know. He grazed my sleeve. I took his hat, sent it skipping down the street like a leaf. He laughed. He said, "We'll finish when you're worth the ammunition." And then he bought me a drink I didn't want and told me about mercy, as if it were a card you save for the last hand. Morningstar listened the way healers do, without fear, without haste. Men like that, she said. They convince the world their hunger is a law. He convinced me the law was a hunger, I said. I lived wrong for years under that idea. I thought the only language men speak is challenge. Then I found out the world has other tongues, the sound a woman makes when her father's horse returns without her, the quiet of a child sleeping because the wolves stayed on their side of the fire, the word your own heart says when you stop trying to prove you have one. She set the kettle aside and reached for the piece of bark I had tucked into my coat. Ghost's challenge, the place, the time. She ran her thumb along the edge. You think he was behind what happened to me, she said. Not accusation. An understanding laid in the open, asking to be named. I do, I said, the admission like a stone lifted at last. Kitchi was a knife, but not the hand. Ghost watched the tribes, their old fractures and new threads. He watched your father's authority and the men who wanted its shadow. He saw a story he could tilt. He whispered where the wood was dry. He needed you to vanish so your father would ride armed and angry, so the plains would carry a rumor that would find my fence. He could have sent a letter. He sent a people. Why? She asked. Why would he need to pull 1,000 men like a net just to catch one? Because I was not answering the other bait. I rubbed my eyes with fingers that smelled of ash. He needed me above dirt in a way that did not look like I chose him. He wanted my name in other mouths when he called it. He wanted the West to watch. She considered that while the night thickened, coyotes began to stitch their thin song along the rim of the world. A duel, she said. A story with witnesses. He will pick a place the wind remembers, I said. Split Tree Pass is as much an audience as a stage. She leaned her shoulder against mine. We did not need more heat than the small fire and the fact of each other. You will tell me about Split Tree, she said. 2 junipers, I said, and I could smell them sharp, clean, stubborn green, fused at the base by lightning, separated by wind and time so the trunk splits like a forked tongue. Years back, Ghost and I faced each other just west of that split. The light was wrong, we both knew it. He said, "Not today." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because I want to know what you are when you've learned to be something besides quick." Then he walked away. I thought the insult was mercy. I left the pass with a heart I didn't trust, and a trigger finger that trembled at the thought of being unnecessary. "And now he thinks you are necessary again," she murmured. "He thinks I am inevitable," I said, and some small dangerous part of me felt the old thrill a current under the skin you hate and remember. I put my hand on the ground. It was cold and solid. He is wrong about one thing, which is, I am not going back to be the man he wanted me to be, I said. If I go to that pass, I will not go as a coin he flips for a crowd. I will go to end a thing that has eaten too many names. Morningstar nodded. And I will not go as a daughter stolen to sharpen men. We sat like that until the kettle steamed. She poured and the sage rose into the night, clean and bitter. "Drink," she said. "You will need your hands steady and your mind kind." "Kind?" "Toward yourself," she said. "A man who hates himself aims at ghosts and misses the living." Lo! I smiled because she had cut me open with such gentleness I hardly bled. "Ghost left a second message," I said. "You feel it too." She made a face that in another world might have become laughter. "He said 3 sunsets. He also said, 'Don't be late.' That is not a schedule. It is a threat. He has eyes on the roads. On us," I said. "He knows when we left the ruin. He may know this fire's size." Lo! She wrapped the feather-carved plank in a cloth and tied it to her saddle rig with a knot that would not jostle or loosen. "Then we move early," she said. "We will not travel where he expects. There is a cut behind Stone Pillow Bluff where water used to run. The land still remembers even when the stream does not. It will take us behind Devil's Spine and spare us the open stretch he will be watching." Lair. I looked at her and knew with the certainty of hunger that had finally been fed. I would never have made it out of my own life without this woman. "And if he herds us where he wants anyway, then we will leave our own sign," she said, picking up a slender willow switch and drawing a quick mark in the dust, a circle with a line through it, then another line crossing it at a slant. 2 trails, then a third underneath. We'll let him think we are ahead of ourselves. "Decoy," I said. "Medicine," she said. "Not to fool him. To remind us that his story is not the only one being told." The wind shifted. Somewhere to the west a horse snorted, the kind of sound a night makes when it has learned men are near. We both heard it and did not reach for our weapons. Fear feeds shadows. We fed the fire a sliver of sage and let the night smell good again. "Tell me the thing you have not said," she whispered when the coyotes fell silent. "The one about why you left the trail and buried your guns." I stared at the small flame until my eyes watered. "There was a boy," I said. 15, maybe. He watched a duel, the way boys watch men carving the world into rules they'll pretend to keep. He took my hat after, said, "Mr. Stone, you shoot like a poem." I could not sleep for a week after that. The next time a man challenged me, I saw the boy standing behind his shoulder, learning to be empty where mercy should be. I realized my legend was teaching the wrong lesson to the wrong mouths. So I split my life along the seam where a gun becomes a god. I came here. I tried to make silence holy instead of cowardly. "And Ghost hated that," she said. "He hates what he does not own," I said. "He hates that I might finish the story without him." She leaned closer until her hair clean smoke and wind was all I could smell. "Then let us finish it." We slept in shifts. When it was my turn to watch, I thought about the feather carved into wood, about a hawk's patience, about men who wake every day and decide their pain deserves a stage. And I thought about a jacket in a storm, how a small act of warmth can reroute an entire river in a man's chest. Ghost had lit a match at my home. I would not answer with a bonfire. I would answer with a boundary only I could see. I would kill the story that made him necessary, even if I had to put a bullet into the man to do it. Just before dawn, the stars thinned and the sky became a bruise healing. Morning Star woke, touched my shoulder, and nodded toward the east. We doused the fire with sand and careful breath. We saddled in silence, the kind that does not weigh. When we swung into our seats, the leather made that old familiar creak that can sound like an ending or a beginning, depending on how a man sits with himself. "Split tree," she said. "Split tree," I answered. We rode as the light decided us, and behind us, the arroyo kept our secret. 2 bodies outlined in pressed grass, one small, one long, a circle drawn and crossed, a print of a boot that had learned to walk toward something other than itself. We broke camp before the light had the courage to admit itself. The sky was a bruise, healing, thin at the edges, purple giving way to something like hope. Morning Star had already shouldered the world into order, coals buried, prints brushed out with a willow switch, our bed of pressed grass shaken loose so the ground could forget our shape. "Ghost is watching roads, not memories," she said, tying her hair back with a strip of buckskin. "We'll travel where roads used to be." Lo, we didn't take the trail men take. We slipped into a dry wash that remembered a river, its banks scalloped by old flood and time, its floor a braid of silt and stone. The air held the ghost of water cool, metallic, the way a well smells when the bucket first kisses it. We moved at a steady trot, not the panicked gallop that wastes a horse for pride. I let Doc set the rhythm, 8 hooves, 2 beats, a pause the metronome of survival. The letter said 3 sunsets. Ghost wrote the number like he owned it. I kept count anyway. 1 sun already burned behind us in the smoke of my ruined house. 2 more stood ahead, eyes narrowed, measuring whether I arrived as a man or a story. I have learned that time is both strict and merciful. It gives you exactly what you honor in it. The first day we met no riders, only signs of them. A cigar stub mashed into clay, a thread of gray wool caught in a salt bush, a coal bed still warm under a paper-thin crust of ash, 4 stones set in a soldier's square. Morning Star's eyes missed nothing. 3 men, she said. 2 left-handed. 1 has a mare that toes in on the left fore. See the curve? I did not. I had never envied another creature's sight the way I envied hers. "You've tracked deer, cougars," I said. "Men aren't so different." "They are worse," she said. "Deer do not lie to the ground. Men pretend they weren't here." We paused in a cottonwood scrap at noon. She steeped willow bark to quiet the ache in a rib I'd bruised on the canyon wall. The tea tasted like despair and worked like mercy. I cleaned my revolver on a square of shirt I'd torn the day I swore I wouldn't use it again. Some oaths fail because a man is weak. Some fail because the world decides the oath is too small. I didn't know which kind mine was, only that the cylinder turned smooth and obedient, 6 chambers like 6 unmapped decisions. You aim for men you hate, Morning Star said, her voice carrying a calm gravity that cut sharper than any blade. And you miss the life you want. She did not look at me when she spoke. Her gaze stayed on the revolver resting across my thigh, as though she could see in its steel the same reflection I had been trying to avoid. Her eyes were dark pools that read men the way hunters read tracks. Before I could answer, she placed something in my hand, small and deliberate. A bundle of herbs bound with horsehair, 2 beads, one carved from bone, the other polished shell, and a feather so slight it seemed made of breath more than quill. "Keep this," she said softly, "where your anger lives." "And where is that?" My voice felt unsteady, my throat tight as though my own question had betrayed me. She lifted her hand and pressed it flat against my chest. Not hard, not tender, simply certain. Her palm lingered there, until my lungs remembered the rhythm of steady breathing. "Here," she said. "It beats faster than it should because you've carried too much fire. Let it beat for something else." We rose and moved again, climbing from the wash into a country etched by wind and time, red sandstone rising in jagged teeth around us. In the distance, the land lifted into ridges the settlers called Devil's Spine, while to the south, Stone Pillow Bluff stood heavy and unmovable, like a grief that refused to die. We didn't ride toward either place. Morning Star guided us between them, her path a thread no map could show. She used shadows as allies, tucking us behind rock faces so that no eye from the high ground could trace our passing. Twice she halted, head cocked, the way a deer stills when the wrong sound interrupts the forest. "Listen," she whispered. I strained my ears but heard only the restless wind. She shook her head. "2 ravens. They argue only when men throw meat. Someone is close." Northward we turned, by a degree too small for me to mark, and an hour later her eyes found it. A boot print sunk deep into a seep, as if a finger had pressed the earth's throat. "Scout," I muttered. "Not alone," she replied, pointing toward the slope where 2 pebbles lay skewed against nature, and dust clung to the back of a rock where a crouched man had tied his bootlace. "3," she said with certainty. "One watching the other 2. He doesn't trust them." "How far?" "If they walk, 2 hours. If they follow our backs, 1. She lifted her face to the wind, reading it as though it whispered a secret meant only for her. "They do." We did not run. Running is a language every hunter understands. Instead, Morning Star changed the grammar of our trail. We laid tracks north toward Slick Rock, where sun and time would erase them, then doubled back through a narrow slot that forced us to dismount and lead our horses single file. My shoulders scraped sandstone, my mouth filled with red dust that would stay with me until sleep. On the far side, she stooped, drew 2 crossed lines in the dirt, then added a 3rd stroke beneath. Before I could ask, she scuffed it out with her heel. "For us," she said, "not for them." By dusk, we found cover among juniper and pinyon. No fire tonight. We chewed hard biscuits and strips of venison tough as old leather. Then, from somewhere unseen, she produced a single apple, red as sunset, cutting its sweetness into halves like a healer who knows bitterness cannot stay too long in one mouth. "Tell me something not about ghosts," she said, her voice gentler now. I surprised myself with the answer, "Cottonwoods. 10 of them, behind the barn." I had marked each place, counted where their shade would fall. In 3 years, enough to cool the ground. In 12, they'd sing with the wind. My chest tightened. I can still hear them. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Then we will plant somewhere else." "After," I said. "If there is an after." "There is always an after," she murmured. "It may not be the one you expect, but it comes. That is the world's kindness." We slept in turns. On my watch, the gravel whispered under boots too careful to be casual, and a horse exhaled in the dark. I let my hand rest on my revolver, thumb brushing the hammer. A figure slipped between trees, slight of shoulder, rifle carried like a child a man doesn't know how to hold. Another shadow followed. Ghosts' training showed in their silence, but they were not him. 3, I whispered. Morning Star's hand tapped my ankle once beneath the blanket. She heard. We let them pass. The 3rd lingered, his breath sour with tobacco. He spat, and the spit cracked against stone like glass surrendering. Then he moved on. At dawn we traced their tracks backward to a camp. 3 bedrolls, but the stones of a 4th fire circle told another story. Someone had sat apart, feigning detachment but guarding. Morning Star lifted a paper scrap from under a rock, a feather drawn in careless strokes. Ghost's men imitating his mark like boys, sketching a horse, wrong in every detail. By midday, wind shifted. Snow smell rode it from the high country. "He wants you cold," Morning Star said. "Hands numb, steps slow." "No," I answered. "He wants me afraid I'm still the man he remembers." She smiled faintly. "Then let him be wrong twice." That evening, Antelope played tricks with the light below us. Stone one moment, flesh the next. I leaned against a sun-warmed boulder, counting not stars but breaths. 50 for steadiness, 50 for gratitude, 50 for the parts of myself I refused to bring to a duel. Morning Star wrapped my right hand with a strip of doeskin cut from her glove. "So the cold doesn't choose for you," she said. "What if I miss?" "You cannot miss truth," she answered. "The bullet is not the only thing that flies straight." Later, she taught me a Lakota breath for fear: inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8, until even my bones remembered I was not alone inside myself. I showed her how to measure distance by the width of a man's shoulders, how a heartbeat can bend the math of aim. We rested, frost trimming the blanket edges by dawn. She touched my cheek. "One more sun," she said. "Then the story ends." When we rode out, shadows stretched ahead like scouts we didn't command. The land rose in treacherous folds, each swell a trap of trust. Twice I spotted snares, a cow skull bleached too white, a cut log hiding a mirror angled to catch light. Ghost's hand was everywhere. At noon we found a hawk feather laid carefully across stone, too deliberate for chance. I lifted it, but Morning Star tucked it into my collar. "Let the wind bear that weight, not you." We drank from a seep where moss clung to stone like a promise. Each swallow counted hers, mine. The pass ahead felt like a memory sharpened to a blade. At a blackened fire ring long cold, she drew the same sign in ash, 2 lines, crossed, a third beneath, and erased it again. "For us," she whispered. "What will you teach the boy who once called your shooting a poem?" she asked. "To set the gun down," I said, "and listen to cottonwoods after 12 years' growth." Her nod was approval enough. When the pass finally opened, it looked unchanged, as though time itself had bowed to Ghost stage. A note tacked to the tree with a knife weighted. On time, it read, "Miracle," and beneath, "Bring your own mercy." Morning Star's eyes searched mine. "Is it trapped?" "Everything here is trapped," I said. The silence deepened until even the wind grew still. Somewhere, unseen, a coin flipped and struck stone, obscene in its perfection. Then his voice came smooth as water over rock. "Jedediah Stone," Elias Thorne said. "You made it. The West still runs on time." I looked not toward the voice, but at the split tree, where once he told me I was not a finished sentence. Morning Star stepped close, her shoulder brushing mine. I felt the iron weight of my gun and the lighter weight of her feather, both demanding truth. "Ghost," I said into the waiting sky, "you found a day with my name on it. What do you plan to write?" "An ending," he said, his smile folded inside the word. "The kind boys remember." What do you call a life that restarts at the edge of everything you thought you knew? Some people name it madness. Others name it mercy. The poets say redemption with their mouths full of blood. As for me, I've begun to think it's simply love, the kind that doesn't arrive with a trumpet, but with a jacket given to a stranger in the rain. The kind that doesn't ask if you're ready before it changes your road. This was more than a Wild West love story. It was the first page of a longer book I had been too afraid to open. Call it Wild West love, if you like. Call it one of those cowboy love stories old men try to spoil with a smirk and cannot. All I know is that the quiet rancher who had sought solitude rode out that day a different man, not because the world had grown softer, but because my heart had learned to hold something it had lost. A vow to be brave for more than myself. The journey had just begun. The plains did not promise safety, only horizon. But Morning Star rode where I could see her, and beyond her the chief's feathers caught the new light, and beyond that the sky went on and on, the old country of hope.